Good afternoon. As my colleagues, I want to say thanks for all who organized this wonderful conference. My English is not so good, so I ask your patience to hear. I bring to this panel about Asian Christianities and Theologies of the Future some perspectives from Latin America. My colleagues Diego and Carlos already presented some challenges and tasks to Latin American society and its theology, and its church and theology today. I want to organize my presentation about the future of theology around three challenges and its tasks: the cultural and religious pluralism, first one; second, the postmodern subjectivities; and the third, scandal of socioeconomic inequalities. These challenges are experienced differently in other contexts as the Asian context. Our conversation can enrich and fertilize the work and the doing Latin America theology. First challenge: Latin American theology in the face of cultural and religious pluralism. Until Vatican II, Latin American identity was characterized by miscegenation, Latin languages, Portuguese and Spanish, and religion, Catholicism. In recent decades, modernization and urbanization have resulted in the fragmentation of their fold unit from which Latin American identity was expressed, giving rise to pluralism manifested above all in three spheres of social relations: ethnicity, gender, and religion. For indigenous people of Latin America and for African populations there, the last one reduced to slavery, colonization represented either the loss of their languages, traditions, and religions, or the survival of certain elements in the resulting mestizo cultures. At the end of the 20th century, indigenous and Afro-descendant organizations gained prominence in Latin American countries, thanks to the growing awareness that they could be the subjects of their own history, and thanks to the construction of the grand narrative of the modern world. The Church and theology have participated in this process that demands a slow healing of the memory and the show of the gestures that in fact recognize these others, denied throughout history, and which today are still the prime victims of violence and poverty in the countries of the region. The second manifestation of pluralism in Latin America has been awakened to issues of gender. Feminist movements and LGBTI groups that emerged in the past decades denounced machismo, homophobia, and intolerance. They realize initiatives that promote the defense of women's rights, as well as a culture of respect for sexual diversity. Despite some progress, there is still a long way to go, implying an education in language and gestures, as well as significant changes in the social and institutional landscape. The Church and theology has also given rise to important initiatives in the pastoral and theoretical camp of gender. But the suspicion with the ideology of gender prevents the taking of bolder steps in view of a great recognition of the place of the woman in the society and a great respect of sexual diversity. Religion is a third area, and with pluralism manifests itself in Latin America. From the end of the 1960s to today, almost 40% of Catholics left the Church. Those who leave the Church in general either join evangelical groups of a Pentecostal, Neo-Pentecostal, and Post-Pentecostal nature, or claim themselves to have no religious affiliation. Evangelical Christians focused heavily on visibility, building large churches, investing in big media, and having an active presence in the political space. The Neo-Pentecostal strand has the theology of prosperity as a theoretical reference, having great affinity with the liberal society of consumption, responding in part of the emergence of the urban individual. The indigenous and Afro-descendant world has also seen an important return to their spiritual traditions, as we can see by their organization in many countries, and as we can too see by the indigenous and Afro-descendant theologies. How can theology respond to the challenges raised in these areas where pluralism has erupted? Already, the colonial, intercultural, gender-related, and interreligious readings have made significant strides in the continent's theological reflection. The sapiential model, in its biblical understanding and other religious traditions, can enrich such readings. The writings of the wise and the oral wise insisted on that which is common to humans in their quest to live well with other unjust societies, recognizing the other in their difference as a gift, given and receiving to the other something they not have. Second challenge, Latin American theology and the eruption of the postmodern individual. There is some consensus in the analysis of postmodern culture, called by many post-metaphysical. It's a critical culture of the grand narratives that gave rise to the modern world and its confidence on reason that is strong as the bear of truth, generally identified with the rationality of the Enlightenment in its colonialist Western form, responsible for the great wars of the 20th century, and the trait that technical instrumental rationality represents for the future of life on the planet. Averse to idea of the meaning of history, it opposes the temporal outlook that prevailed in the modern age marked by the future, in its utopian form and driven by a subject of history. Critical to the past and to its traditions, the postmodern emerged as a vulnerable subject without great identitarian references, leaving the moment and valuing its small narratives. The technological resources of information allow it to inhabit many worlds in the same time, determining a new kind of subjectivity and sociability, that of the virtual world and its networks. The aesthetic dimension, marked by feelings and the body cult, more important than ethics, becomes central to this culture. Less close to transcendence, the postmodern gives new meaning to spirituality and religions, and not necessarily to traditional institutions where belief was lived, often falling easy to all kinds of fundamentalism. These and other postmodern cultural threads are seen in almost every Latin American country, certainly not in the same way as in the strongly secularized societies of Europe and North America. What is specific to Latin American postmodernity is the combining of several rationalities of the same time. On the continent, there is a coexistence of indigenous peoples and peasant population who do not know modern reason. Part of the population is attuned to the secularization process, prosper to modern reason. The majority of the popular classes live in precarious conditions in cities undergoing a rapid process of modernization. The Church and theology realized that faith is no longer transmitted by tradition, but by conviction, and this presupposes an encounter with Jesus and Christian disciplines. These elements certainly central to the future of Christianity in the region, but postmodernity is a complex phenomenon that demands from the Church and theology a return to their foundations in order to face postmodern fragmentation. This return demands a reading of the memory of faith and of theology as an act of memory making. Christianity only exists as community of memory, as stated by the narratives of its foundation texts. The rediscovery of this task can be enriched in the conversation with Asian Christianities and their age-old cultures, as they too are embodied in many acts of memory. Third challenge and test Latin American theology in the scandal of inequalities. Latin American theology is born in the context of the 1960s, when many countries of the continent lived with socioeconomic injustice, scandalous inequalities, and oppression of authoritarian political system. This theology gave rise to the prophetic character of the Church. The eruption for the poor gave birth to the Church, the grassroots communities, and the critical subjects to serve in many causes and in the struggles of the people. This prophetic figure in the Church was persecuted, martyred. Moreover, John Paul II and Benedict XVI misunderstood this Church. In recent years, in addition to its inability to do away with socioeconomic disparities, Latin America has seen a growth of violence linked to drug trafficking and use. The growth of migration became dramatic, also worrying the destruction of the environment, despite the ecological awareness. Prophecy preserves its relevance in Latin American theology, critique of those dimensions that threaten human dignity, creating situations of poverty, violence, and exclusion. This perspective reveals new horizons of hope and needs to be rediscovered in light of the new conservative winds that blow in the politics and economy of the continent today. In some Asian churches, prophetic task of church and theology has been important developments, and undoubtedly it can also enrich and enlighten the theology that desires to serve the poor in Latin America. Thank you very much.